Welcome everybody to today's free 30-minute session. My name is Nazaleen Aitken. Just to give you a little bit of an introduction. So I'm a registered nutritionist with the AFN. My background really is in the private sector, so clinical consultancy, women's health, anti-aging, and before that in academia. So I was a lecturer and a researcher for many years in human sciences, particularly in nutrition. And today we're going to be talking about nutrition in the workplace. So this is a free 30-minute session. It's part of a much longer session. So we're only going to be able to really scratch the surface, but we're going to have a high-level overview of the topics. More in-depth sessions are available if you're interested, and any inquiries should be sent to inquiries@2healthlimited.co.uk. Okay, so in terms of an outline for today's session, we're going to talk first of all about the difficulty with generic advice. So there's a lot of advice out there. It doesn't fit everybody. That's the nature of generic advice, and it's quite difficult to get a message across, a short message across which is going to fit everybody. So we'll just talk about that and the impact that it has and how we're going to try and factor that into today's discussion. Then we're going to try and get as specific as possible, having understood the difficulty with generic advice. And so we're going to try and look at the characteristics of the UK workforce and get an idea of what the average UK worker really sort of looks like, how they behave, what they eat, so we can try and figure out which advice would be very suited to the average UK worker, as much as possible. Then we're going to move straight into top 25 tips for better nutrition and health status. So, what kind of advice can we give the average UK worker after we've built up a kind of profile of who they are? Then we're going to think about making your own lunch. So a lot of people say, it's very expensive to make healthy meals. They don't necessarily last, stay fresh, and so on. And I'm going to give you some ideas loosely, so I haven't got time to go into the recipes too much, but just some ideas that anybody could easily, pull in to their lunch break, basically. So things that are cheap, quick and easy, flexible, so you can make different versions of them that are going to last. So, you could potentially make them a few days in advance, but still remain nutritious. And then finally, we're just going to touch briefly on the influence of your environment. What kind of difference does environment make in terms of our dietary choices and the amount we eat as well, so quality and quantity. Okay, so in terms of the difficulty with generic advice, well, the problem is that people hear a lot of conflicting advice, first of all, from public health bodies, and also changing advice. One year you'll hear that it's bad to have fat, the next year it seems to be it's bad to have carbohydrate, then it's bad to have protein. People get confused and they get disenchanted. And it's not just public health bodies. These messages come from health professionals and, to an extent, self-proclaimed health gurus, or maybe even doctors that have a little bit interest in nutrition, but don't necessarily, understand the area in a lot of detail overall. And so people get frustrated. And, I've got a lot of sympathy for that, to be honest. And so this is a problem. Why is it a problem? Because, well, in terms of there are risk factors for disease, and in terms of the risk factors that we could realistically modify, nutrition represents the largest of these. So, it's up to 70% of your risk for non-communicable diseases, meaning diseases that aren't caught through infection, that can't be transferred. These types of diseases that plague modern industrialized countries like the UK, nutrition is going to be the biggest factor in terms of your risk of this. So 70% is significant, right? And so it's important that people don't lose interest in nutrition, but at the same time, who are they going to listen to? What are they going to believe? It's an important question. And the reality is nutritional requirements are really complex, right? Anybody who has a kind of one sentence answer for a question probably, is just trying to put across what they think would be the most beneficial message, but it's not going to fit for everybody. How many vitamins you should take, when you should take them. It's going to depend on who you are, how you're living, what you did yesterday, what you had for breakfast. And so it's really complex. And it's going to be a result really of your lifestyle and your environment, the kind of things that you're exposed to and what you're eating as well, right? You can have different requirements based on what you're eating. So how specific can we get? Who am I trying to address here? Well, I'm trying to address the average UK worker, and the average UK worker, that's not going to be everybody, right? But what does the average UK worker look like? Well, we know, because there's an extensive data being collected on UK workers, But the average UK worker is largely sedentary, right? Meaning that they don't really move around a lot. Most people are sat at a desk dealing, with a computer. Obviously, some people aren't. Some people are working in warehouses. They're moving around a lot. But the average UK worker is largely sedentary at home and in the workplace. Their BMI is significantly elevated. So, it's over 25, possibly over 26, 27. They're overweight or they're obese. They're aging, and what we mean by aging is the UK has an aging workforce, so there are people are having less children and so on, and so there's less younger people coming in, and so the bulk of the UK workforce is increasingly aging, as in their age is sort of 40, 45, 50, 55 and increasing. That proportion, the sort of, let's say, middle to older age proportion is increasing, and people are retiring later and later. And so by and large, statistically, the average UK worker is no longer a young adult. As a result of aging, they're going to have, particular issues that come alongside that. And we can debate whether that's a natural outcome of age or the kind of lifestyle that we typically live in the UK. But they'll have issues with mobility, so how they move around. They'll also have some disturbances at the level of sort of hormones and metabolic functioning. Now, part of this is just the natural outcome of aging, right? After a certain age, there's a change in our hormonal profile. There's a level of resistance that kicks in. And so there are some specific challenges. So when we get things like RDAs, they're aimed at really an adult, but they're not aimed at older adults. Requirements change with age. And so when we're giving advice, we have to factor in that we're likely going to be speaking to somebody who has hormonal metabolic disturbances, and also potentially disturbances in cognitive function. Brain fog, tiredness, inability to concentrate, their memory might be increasingly impaired. That's going to be the kind of average profile. They're likely to already have one or more non-communicable inflammatory disorders. So what I mean by that, again, is these non-infectious diseases, right? So by the time we're 50, on average, people are taking up to 4 different medications as a result of the conditions that they have. So it could be conditions relating to the heart, to the kidney, it could be a metabolic disturbance like type 2 diabetes, but they're likely to already have a condition, because we're saying most people are over 50 and most people are going to have some sort of either manifest or on the way to manifesting a non-communicable condition. They're going to be consuming too much processed foods, and I've put an asterisk there just to remind me to tell you that ultimately all processed foods they carry some problems with them, pretty much, but it's unavoidable to not have any processed foods. It would take a lot of work. And so what I mean by too much is more than 5 or 10% of their diet, or rather I should rephrase that as they're going to be heavily reliant on processed foods. Number 6, they're likely to be drinking a lot of alcohol and coffee. Increasingly, people who are middle-aged, they use alcohol actually just to help them fall asleep, and that's a bit problematic. It's not really the same as normal sleep. And drinking a lot of coffee, which is going to be messing up the natural homeostatic mechanisms of how we stay awake and how we get sleepy and so on. And also coffee has some risks on our cardiovascular system or liver, depending on what type of coffee we're using. They're also, likely to be smoking or vaping potentially, and or on medication. And why does medication matter? Well, it messes up our ability to absorb certain nutrients. It also changes where we store them, how we use them, how much we need. So it causes a lot of complications. Number 7, they're almost certainly not eating enough fruits or vegetables. Now, it's not a rule that you have to have fruits or vegetables to live, right? There are people in the world, there are populations which don't have any and are doing pretty well, but they're not faced with the kind of challenges that we're facing. It's very important for us to get the polyphenolic compounds in fruits or vegetables to kind of counteract aspects of modern living and other elements of our diet, and the drinking and the smoking and the alcohol and the coffee and all of those things. Increasingly, they're avoiding red meat and dairy, or they're eating too much. So we've seen a kind of polarized society in terms of nutritional intake, where some groups are trying to eliminate whole aspects, whole categories of food, and other groups are having way too much of it and in a processed nature. And so each of these groups is going to have a particular set of requirements. Number 9, we're suffering a cost of living crisis. That means that People are having to make big choices in terms of how they spend their money. And unfortunately, you know, diet seems to be one of the things that goes straight away in these situations. And, you know, for some people, it's a very serious matter, and they don't know how to spend the little money that they may have available on foods which are truly nutritious, because like I said, you know, the messages are kind of mixed up. Number 10, they're deficient in multiple vitamins and minerals. So as we get older, our chance of being deficient, and there's a big debate as to, you know, there's clinically deficient, meaning you're manifesting signs of disease. So if it was vitamin C, you'd have scurvy, it would be discernible, your gums would be receding, your teeth would potentially be falling out. But there's also a big gap from deficient to optimal levels. And so if we also include people who are not at the optimal levels, and we could debate what that is, you know, almost everybody is deficient in something. You take something like B2, we already know 92% of the population, up to 92% is deficient in B2. So there's a lot going on. We're already dealing with somebody who is likely to be lacking things. And most people, you know, in the UK, it's going to be things like vitamin D, vitamin B12, B2. And so there's specific things, iodine, selenium, that they're going to be deficient in to start off with. Number 11, not enough oily fish, or, you know, other sort of long chain omega-3s that we could potentially get from different marine sources, such as algae now. But that's key, and we'll talk about that because that's very important. You know, omega-3, the long chains, they turn into hormones spontaneously in the body pretty much. And those hormones are important in pushing forward rest and repair processes, right? So regenerating tissue, mopping up the damage of stress. And instead, we're getting a lot of excessive consumption of vegetable oils. And I'm not talking about olive oil when I say that. I'm talking about sunflower oils and packages that are labeled vegetable oils. When you eat out as well and take away food, that's going to be rich in vegetable oil. And a lot of foods that are high in saturated fats, they're also going to come with a lot of omega-6, right? And omega-6 that's the opposite of omega-3. It's going to be pushing forward. It's going to be creating hormones that push forward inflammatory processes. So amping up the immune system, putting us into attack mode, and potentially, you know, damaging our own tissues. So that being said, what are some tips that, you know, could apply to the average UK worker in terms of improving their nutritional status and their health status as a result? So the first is, you know, I would suggest to develop some acquired tastes. There are some foods that we don't like, and there's a reason for that. So when we're born, we tend to be geared towards liking foods that are high in carbohydrate and fat, because they generally tend to be safe foods. But foods that are bitter could potentially be, you know, poison, right? So acquired tastes are these kind of bitter tastes that we develop, and it's supposed to be that, you know, parents encourage children and say, this is safe, do eat it, do eat it. And so we pick up these tastes as time goes on. And so, you know, some of us haven't had this kind of encouragement, and we don't like certain types of foods, particularly if they're bitter. But, you know, this is a big problem because a lot of bitter foods have things in them which are very beneficial for us. And so saying, I don't like the taste of this tastes funny, you know, to an extent, we have to just eat the thing that's going to be good for us. You know, food is not just about enjoyment, and that will tie on to point 4. The second thing is to get passionate about cooking, you know, take an interest in the process of cooking. And what does that mean? That means understand that cooking is about nourishing your body. The preparation of it, the selection of it, you know, it could almost be a meditation on your own health and self-care. And so it's really important to cook, because when you cook, you're not going to put in all those, you know, unknown kind of ingredients that you see on the back of ready-made sauces and so on. You're going to put fresh ingredients. You can make the best version of things, versions that you can trust. And so, you know, people that like to cook, they tend to look after themselves better, and they tend to get a lot more vitamins and minerals and use a lot less vegetable oil. And so they're going to, you know, they're going to kind of push against the progression of these non-communicable diseases much more easily. Number 3, be honest with yourself about your eating behavior. So a lot of people who, are, you know, overweight or obese, it's tied to an emotional problem. Something happened at some point in their life which kind of threw them off kilter. And, you know, food is designed very carefully by food scientists in order to prompt more eating. And so we have to be honest about why we're eating. You know, we're not eating because we're hungry. Sometimes we're eating because we're bored. We're eating because we're frustrated. We're eating because we, you know, are emotional, and that perhaps we haven't processed those emotions and dealt with those behaviors. And so it's really important to address your eating behavior and to take it seriously. You know, it can potentially be an addiction, just like, you know, alcoholism or drug addictions. It's a very serious thing. So number 4 ties on to point 1, really. Food is a medicine. So we need to eat to live. We don't live to eat, right? So food can't be our hobby. It can't be our enjoyment, unless, you know, our hobby is to make really nutritious foods and to enjoy the fact that we're creating such combinations which are going to benefit us. You know, food is a medicine. It is the number 1 thing that you can do to protect your health, to give you longevity, and not just living long, but having a long health span. So it's not a light matter. And we need to understand that food is medicine. We take in vast quantities of it, and everything that we take in has a potent biochemical effect, right? Number 5, don't eliminate foods without seeking specialist advice. So we can all be tempted at times to participate in diets. We're not going to have gluten. We're not going to have lactose. We're not going to have meat. We're only going to have meat. You know, there's all variations of diets, and each one potentially poses a risk to health, right? Because everybody has a different genetic makeup. Everybody, you know, if you don't know how to secure, I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, we're eliminating meat, but we're iron deficient. You know, we really need to think about which foods we need to make sure we're eating a lot of and how we're preparing them, because that has an effect as well, in order to make sure that we don't run out of a particular vitamin or mineral. So if you are following a specialist diet, which a lot of the UK workforce now is, please do speak to somebody and have an assessment of what you need to watch out for, and you know, the care you need to take in order not to end up in a situation down the line where something has happened which, you know, can't be reversed potentially. And the thing with vitamin and mineral deficiencies is sometimes it could be 10-15 years before the consequence of that prolonged kind of, you know, insufficiency state manifests as a problem. Number 6, and this is again in terms of combating being overweight and obese, we need to accept that it's okay to be hungry. You know, sometimes we eat too much and sometimes we can eat too little, and that's okay. And, you know, hunger is supposed to inconvenience you. That's a part of the survival instinct of man, that, you know, we don't like hunger, and that's supposed to prompt us to go out and get more food, right, to survive. But it can be really good for you. You know, intermittent fasting, for example, has been shown to have potent health effects. It can switch on genes that are associated with longevity. It allows your body time to repair and regenerate. And so, you know, we have to kind of accept that, particularly if we want to lose weight, ultimately we need to be hungry sometimes. That's the only time where we're really losing weight. Okay, number 7, when shopping, take the time to read labels. I think this is really important. Well, labels are so long and they're so arduous now, so I can understand why people, you know, shy away from reading them sometimes, but we need to understand what we're putting into our bodies. And so, you know, one day when you've got some time free, you just start reading about the things that you're eating regularly, have an awareness of them. You know, reality is the result of your kind of intention and your attention. Allow your attention to go to the foods that you're eating and to understand what's in them and what's not in them as well. Don't shop when you're hungry, because you're likely to buy things that have an increased calorie content and more than you need. So, you know, you're going to end up wasting some money potentially, or creating food waste. And that's money and food that could be spent on something that's really good for you. And don't buy junk food. It's very difficult. Don't feel down on yourself if you find it difficult to resist junk food when it's put in front of you. That's also natural and normal, right? We wouldn't have come this far as a species if we were turning away energy dense foods, you know, particularly ones that gave us some sort of reward, an internal signal that, you know, we should be having them. Just don't put yourself around them in the first place. So don't buy junk food, and understand if there's parts of your routine which might put you in the presence of food which is going to have a high energy content and a low multivitamin and mineral content. Number 8, create and participate in workplace health education and health schemes. If there isn't one, create one. You know, it could be something as simple as, you know, women who are going through the menopause, they might want to get together, create a group where they can talk to each other about things, you know, spend some time learning, reading, sharing literature on how their nutritional requirements are changing. It could be that you're organizing a kind of walk. It could be that you're organizing a day where people only bring in healthy food, whatever that might be. It's good to just kind of allow for yourself to create the things that you feel are missing rather than waiting around for them to be created sometimes. If there are things available, you know, knowledge is power. So participate as much as possible in any workplace health education schemes, or schemes which are, you know, going to boost your likelihood of thinking and acting in a way which brings forward health. Number 9, get tested for deficiencies if you can. You know, particularly the deficiencies that we know are common, whether that's speaking to your GP, whether that's investing in getting tested for them yourself. You are likely to be deficient in something. Not everything is going to be covered necessarily by your doctor, but, you know, again, knowledge is power. Once you find out what you're missing, it's much easier to start having a think about what we could do in terms of replacing those things or focusing on those things. Some people need more vitamins than others. Some people need much less. So it's good to get an idea of where you are so that you can prevent your risk of disease. Number 10. Oh, sorry, this is a repeat of this. Let's skip this. Number 11, reduce your intake of refined carbohydrates and simple sugars, but don't fear fruit. So a lot of people these days are worried about, you know, if I eat fruit, I'm going to put on weight. It's a sugar. It's not. Fruit comes in a complex matrix, right? Particularly if you're just eating it. As opposed to having it in a smoothie or something. And that complex matrix better regulates for the way that it's going to be released into your blood, right? So it's not going to have so much of a high glycemic index, but more importantly, it comes with vitamins and minerals that are going to mop up any kind of deleterious effect that they have. So when you, for example, have an orange, yes, it has a certain amount of, you know, sugar, much less than you think. But it also has a lot of vitamin C, and vitamin C is going to, for example, you know, de-link it to red blood cells or to vessel walls, and so mop up that damage. And it's much more important that you get the vitamins and minerals, and don't worry about fruit. You know, I'm yet to see somebody who's developed a serious health condition because they were just eating fruit. It's kind of self-limiting. We don't overeat fruit to the kind of quantities that we might overeat, you know, things like Haribo or Coca-Cola, things like that. Eat a rainbow. Very important. You know, each color denotes some other benefit. You know, color is a reflection of the chemical constituents of food. So, you know, red foods, for example, contain proanthocyanins that are going to mop up the effects of things in your cardiovascular system. And then we've got, for example, yellow foods are going to contain beta carotenes that are going to be very good in terms of mopping up damage done to your lungs. So the best thing to do, if you don't know about this, but you're somebody who's already suffering from a condition or has a history or you know, family history of a particular condition, or you're worried about it, or you're fitting the risk profile in terms of being overweight, sedentary, not really looking after yourself, a good rule is just to have as many different colors as possible to have all angles covered, right? And, you know, that's kind of why foods like Haribo attract people, because they've got all those different colors in there. We are geared towards looking for different colors. We can de-learn that because, well, unlearn that rather. We can unlearn that because we've got this high energy reward from certain foods. But it's really a good idea to just try to eat a rainbow, whether that's in a salad or whether that's in a fruit salad or whatever it might be. Try to get as many colors in there as possible. Eliminate cigarettes and alcohol. If you want to save money, right, this is what you need to eliminate. And I appreciate that it's difficult. Of course, nicotine, you know, is very addictive. So is the tar and cigarettes and so on. And it's also, you know, comforting movement, really. It kind of punctuates time. That's what cigarettes do. And alcohol, it can be difficult to conceive, you know, what will happen when I meet with my friends? What will happen when I have a special event and so on? But it's really, really bad for you. And I do believe that if somebody has, you know, the intention on quitting these things, they can definitely make significant cutbacks. There are things you can do, you know, practices you can put into place, whether that's journaling, meditation, seeking support, joining a support group, whether that's cognitive behavioral therapy, whatever it might be. It's well worth you investing your time and energy into it for financial reasons alone, you know, and then on top of it for the health reasons. Number 14, This is something my professor used to say, less salt and more pepper. What I mean here is just go wild with the spices and the herbs. They really have, in each one has its own very interesting benefit, right? They can be microbial, antiviral, so very good to have, particularly during the winter. They can be anti-inflammatory, so they're going to combat all of those inflammatory diseases, and there's no risk, most importantly, right? So pharmaceutical agents, okay, they can successfully have an effect in maybe 100% or 90% of our population, and maybe these spices, you know, are only going to have a positive effect on 50% of the population, or 60 or whatever, but you know, there's no risk. So you get as many of them in as possible, and you know, reduce the salt instead, because most people are suffering from high blood pressure and so on, and kidney issues. Consider supplementing, you know, speak to, I would say, a nutritionist to figure out exactly what it is you should be supplementing with. But if you have a bad diet, getting a good multivitamin is a good starting point for a lot of people, particularly if you're not getting your 5 a day. Consider eating liver once a week. This is a big one. You know, liver is the depot of vitamins and minerals in the body. It's so nutritious that it could be dangerous to have it more than once a week, right? But if you do eat meat and you can eat liver, it's a really good way and very cheap way, right? To make sure that you have a huge influx of vitamins and minerals coming in. Number 17, have an egg for breakfast. People who have an egg for breakfast are known to be able to maintain a much better weight and appetite control. An egg, if you also think about it, it's like it has everything in it necessary to bring about life, and in very good ratios, right? So an egg is a very good idea for breakfast, and add some herbs, add some tomatoes, cucumbers, whatever it might be. Number 18, get into herbal teas. It's a good way to reduce your coffee intake, so, you know, protect your cardiovascular health. Things like green tea, you know, they reduce your appetite. They also contain things like, you know, epigallocatechin, which are potent antioxidants. So they're going to help with a range of different conditions. And they promote, you know, alpha waves. So they have things like theanine in it, which promote alpha waves. And so they make you relaxed and calm. And so they're going to mop up the effects of stress. Herbs and spices to everything, even water. Some people find water boring. Okay, I can understand that. It's not the most exciting thing. We could put, you know, some fresh rosemary into that. It's cheap. Let it infuse for kind of 24 hours, and it's going to have so many health benefits. There's almost nothing that rosemary hasn't been found, for example, you know, to be beneficial in treating. So that's a good practice, a good cheap practice to make water fun, keep you hydrated, and increase your nutrition intake. Watch out for 50% fat, 50% sugar foods. These have been very carefully engineered to be very addictive. There's nothing in nature that's 50% fat, 50% sugar. Generally, fat comes with protein, and sugar, you know, comes by itself in the form of, you know, largely in the form of fructose and things like that. So anything that's 50% fat, 50% sugar, like pizza, pasta, chocolates, ice creams, there's a reason why they lure you in even when you're full. So try not to buy foods that are 50% fat, 50% sugar. Eat more fish, so to increase your omega-3 intake. You know, if you do eat meat, this is the best thing you can do to ward off communicable diseases. In the UK, you know, most people have an intake of omega-3 of about 1, let's say, right? And we're comparing it to omega-6. That should be 1 to 1, but it's like 1 to 24 or 1 to 16. So we're greatly in need of omega-3. And the best way to get those long chains is through eating oily fish. The other way to do it is, you know, rather than increase the omega-3, is to decrease the omega-6. So eliminate sunflower oils and vegetable oils from your life completely, if possible. And that's key in readdressing your hormonal makeup, right? That's the major nutritional element underpinning the emergence of inflammatory non-communicable conditions such as cancers, most types of cancers, cardiovascular diseases, neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, dementia, irritable bowel disorders, inflammatory bowel disorders, most things with an itis at the end of it as well. Consider the provenance of key items. So important items like, you know, meats, look at where they came from. It really matters. You know, vegetables, for example, they're a reflection of the soil content. And so it's important to think about where your food is coming from. Number 24, don't assume that all nuts and seeds are good for you, particularly if you're inflamed, if you're overweight in particular. You know, things like cashews and peanuts, they're very high in omega-6. They're not necessarily going to be doing you any favors, not the same as Brazil nuts and pecans. And number 25, plant a seed. You know, they say, the natives and the Native American saying, if you want to get to know the way the world works, you know, plant a seed and you'll understand the complexity of how only the right thing grows in the right place, and you'll develop an appreciation for growing things, hopefully, which will translate into an appreciation of food. So very quickly, cheap, quick, durable, flexible and nutritious options. Tinned fish, have it with pasta, with herbs. It's cheap, it's durable. You could get, you know, 6-7 tins, just put them to the side. Even better, combine it with some salads and beans and things like that. So that's a very cheap, quick, durable, flexible and nutritious food. If you don't have these things, then, you know, if you don't have meat, really, you could do overnight oats and try and put as many seeds and, you know, I don't know, I suppose you could use full fat meat, you could use almond milk, or however you want to do it. Get as many fruits in there, dried fruits, frozen fruits as possible. That's very nutritious, filling, good for you. You know, oats contain proteoglycans, which are very good. Granola mixes are another option if you want it to be a bit more tasty and crunchy. You could put dried fruit in there, and soups and stews. You know, they keep very well, and you can put a lot of things in there. Okay, so we value your feedback. This is the Trustpilot link if you want to leave a review. We'd really appreciate that. And if you want to get in touch, here are